banter written here, so let's give that a go. How is it? 2025 already, everyone? Is it 2025? It could be 2026, and I got the date wrong. Yes, it feels like it's kind of snuck up on it. I know, and this is another one of those situations where Andre asked me months ago, can I please preach? And again, I didn't start preparing until very, very, very recently. So I think you can over-prepare sometimes, right? That'll be fine. Yeah. Andre he thinks he's being nice when he says I can preach about whatever I want. But sometimes it's nice to have some constraints to kind of focus you and direct you in a particular direction. So I asked for a bit of direction, and he said he's been recently preaching about minor characters in the Bible. So I saw he did Jude last week, and he said he's done Tabitha recently. I don't feel like that's very good direction, because pretty much everyone in the Bible is a minor character in my opinion, except for Jesus. So it doesn't really narrow the field much at all in my opinion. But I'm going to do my best. I'm going to start off by talking about something else. So, last time I was here, I was talking about how I work in a particular industry, and there's a whole set of constraints and rules and gatekeeping involved in that industry. Like most things, there's conferences that you can go to for the sector I'm in, and you can hear talks by people. And there was one in particular by a guy called Brian Cantrell, who was talking about the culture of our industry, and he was talking about a book he read called The Soul of a New Machine. So this is a book written in the early 80s, and it's about a company that was building a new computer, and the actual business and organizational processes and forces and the economics and the business and all that kind of stuff, and the way the team interacted and stuff like that fit together. And it's largely a bunch of anecdotes. I've seen multiple talks by this guy, and this particular anecdote comes up quite a lot. And there's an anecdote about how there's this established business who's got experience building these things, and there's a particular they have existing systems, but they wanted to have a simulator of it, because a business having lots and lots of their own equipment lying around means they have wasted resources on the floor. Sometimes they just need to test something, and it's easier to do that in a simulation or it's more cost effective to do that in a simulation than it is to have extra equipment lying around, particularly when your sales are measured in the hundreds, right? If you've got 100 computers that you're selling to the world and one of them's in your office, that's literally a single percentage or a whole percentage of your capacity that's not being sold, right? So they wanted a simulator for this particular thing, but the established wisdom at this company was it was too complicated to simulate effectively. So no one ever took on this project. But what they ended up in this situation where they were taking on interns. So these are guys who are doing their tertiary education, and they need to get experience in the field. So this guy turns up and they go, well, we don't know what to give you, but have you heard of a simulator for this particular piece of equipment? So they just thought it would keep him occupied for a few months, and everyone would be happy because he got to do some work, and they didn't have to supervise him that closely. So they let him go off and do that, and then a month or so later he comes back and says, I finished that, what do I do next? And everyone there who's an established engineer in this organisation is like, what are you talking about? That's impossible. And he goes, was it? Was it impossible? And it turns out he actually achieved it. There's a contemporary story about a guy called Seymour Cray, who's famous in my industry anyway for making Cray computers. And he wholeheartedly says he liked to hire inexperienced engineers right out of school because they didn't know what was impossible. So they're more willing to try stuff that more experienced engineers did not like to try. They had a lot more enthusiasm and were less encumbered by bitter experience, an emphasis on bitterness in this thing. There's also the added benefit that graduate engineers are a lot cheaper than experienced engineers, but yeah. The moral of these stories is that sometimes you can be burdened by knowledge that something is impossible, or all the things that can go wrong, and that can discourage you or give you an excuse not to do something right. Sometimes it's possible to know too much, and sometimes it's better to not know all the things that can go wrong, and that will help you actually get on and do something. There are so many things that I can't do at work because I overthink things so much. And I have so much experience trying to do some things and they go horrifically wrong. So in a lot of cases I don't even try unless I'm completely sure that I have everything figured out up front. That means I'm not really productive in some areas, right? And I'm sure we can all relate to this, right? Does this sound completely weird or foreign to anyone here? We've all had this kind of experience. Cool. There's like handiwork at home which I've been putting off for ages because I just worry so much about what's going to go wrong. So the towel rack in one of the bathrooms at home, like the screw that holds it onto the thing that's stuck in the wall, that screw's broken, but I can't find a replacement for the thing that goes on the wall because I'm worried that when I put it in the wall it'll pull the chipboard off. Then I'll end up with a worse problem, and in the end my kids don't have anywhere to put their towel, right? So a less worried person or a less encumbered person or someone who hadn't watched as much grand designs as me would have just got on with it and stuck something on the wall and the towels would be dry. So yeah. I would like to relate this idea of being over encumbered with experience and knowledge with the story in the Bible. So let's look at Luke 7 verses 1 to 10. Does anyone want to read it or should I just read it? Yes, I see. Fun. Do you want me to do it? All right.
I'll do it.
Okay.
Luke 7, 1 to...
Verse 10.
Okay. Now, when he had ended all his sayings in the audience of the people, he entered into Capernaum, and a certain centurion's servant, who was dear unto him, was sick and ready to die. And when he heard of Jesus, he sent unto him the elders of the Jews, beseeching him that he would come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they besought him instantly, saying that he was worthy for whom he should do this. For he loveth our nation, and he hath built us a synagogue. Then Jesus went with them, and when he was now not far from the house, the centurion sent friends to him, saying unto him, Lord, trouble not thyself, for I am not worthy that thou shouldst enter under my roof. Wherefore, neither thought I myself worthy to come unto thee, but say a word, and my servant shall be healed. For I also am a man set under authority, having under me soldiers, and I say unto one, Go, and he goeth, to another, Come, and he cometh, and to my servant, Do this, and he doeth it. When Jesus heard these things, he marvelled at him, and turned him about, and said unto the people that followed him, I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. And they that were sent, returning to the house, found the servant whole that had been sick.
Thank you. So this story is also recounted in Matthew 8, 5 to 13. There are some slight differences, but the main thrust of the story and the main features of the story are all there. So Mark has kind of really stuck with me. So the book of Mark has really stuck with me from all the study, like we did it in our Bible study group, and it was also the lesson for one of the quarters. And a lot of Mark is Jesus challenging the established church in Israel and their understanding of rules and their salvation and their role. So this story isn't in Mark, but it kind of has that same kind of vibe to me. I think it's worth looking at as a story on its own because it features this statement that Jesus was amazed, or Jesus was marveling, or was, what was the exact word used in the KJV? Marveled, I think. Can anyone...
Yes, he marvelled at him.
Yeah. There are not actually a lot of stories in the Bible of Jesus being amazed or astonished or marveling, right? You could probably count them on one hand, or even a very small number of fingers on one hand. But this is one of those stories. So even from that point of view, I think it's worth taking a look at. We kind of do have a good idea about how Israel and Jewish culture and society was set up. But I would like to look a little bit at what a centurion was back in those days. So, is anyone familiar with the centurion? The hint's in the name, but there's a little bit more to it. So, centurion was a soldier within a legion. So, a legion in Roman times was a army of 5,000 to 7,000 men, or legionnaires, who were commanded by an officer called a legate. This legate promoted 50 to 60 out of this cohort into the role of centurion, and they were responsible for like roughly 100 people underneath them. So the numbers weren't exact. There wasn't like this strict adherence that a centurion only has 100 people, 80 to 120, but the roughly 100 people were under them. These centurions, they were exemplary soldiers, so they were not, it wasn't like it was your turn, ability to command respect. They reported to the legate, so they were responsible to the legate, but they also had people reporting to them, and those people were responsible to the centurion. The centurions were expected to lead by example, and which meant they had to model the behaviour that they wanted the people under them to express, and they were responsible for getting their soldiers under them to behave according to the legate. So they're kind of like this meat in this authority army sandwich, right? They also received a much higher pay than other legionnaires within the legion. So they had, as well as the responsibility, they got some benefit out of it and some discretion about how they would conduct themselves and behave in the larger society. So let's go back to the actual story. I find it useful to try and put myself in the shoes of the people in the story. So we'll just jump around a little bit in there. So if I was in this story, who would I be? What if I were the elders that the centurion sent to Jesus? So this demonstrates that the centurion was respected by the Jewish community, right? This is despite him being a Roman. He was part of the Roman oppression. So somehow he managed to win over the leaders within the Jewish community, or the authorities within the Jewish community. And according to the story, he did this because he built their synagogue. Now, the way he would have done that would have been to provide the resources he had under his command and give them to the Jewish community effectively. So he basically gave his own money and possibly the resources of his, like the time and effort of the people underneath him in his century, to help the Jewish people build their synagogue, which enabled them to continue their religious practices and social norms and stuff like that. So the elders were there and they appealed on his behalf and justified his worthiness because of these contributions, right? So have we ever been asked to go to Jesus on someone else's behalf? I have some bad news. Like pretty much every line I've got written down here ends in a question mark. So at some point I will expect some nods of the head or shakes of the head or even some words. That would be great. We've all been asked to pray for someone, right? Have we? No? Yes? Have we offered to go to Jesus on someone's behalf? How have we framed these requests? Did we do it like the elders there, where we said, this person is worthy of your attention, God or Jesus? Have we ever been guilty of picking and choosing who we intercede on behalf of? Have we ever tried to help someone else because of their position, their job, their role, their benefit they can give to us or the church? I'm not saying that this was the case here, but it is an interesting question that comes out of it, right? Do we pick and choose who we offer help for? What if I was the centurion? So, out of all the characters and the roles within this story, this is the one I identify least with. I don't think I am the centurion. The thing that pops out for me from this story with the centurion is he was raised outside the nation of Israel. He was raised outside the church, effectively. His contributions to Capernaum were despite his upbringing. So Israel was occupied. They had different gods, they had different customs, social mores and stuff like that. But despite that, he was able to recognize a need within that community and help. Did the centurion recognize Jesus because he was in Israel or despite it? The interesting thing for me is that just before in the story we have the elders of the Jewish community coming to Jesus going, this guy's a good guy, he's done a lot of things for us, he deserves your help. But the centurion understood that this doesn't actually matter. He didn't even want Jesus to trouble himself with going to his house. And according to some interpretations that I was looking into for preparing this, the Greek used was, I don't want Jesus to get annoyed by coming to my house and having to deal with all the things that are wrong under my roof kind of thing. I don't want to irritate Jesus at all. And it's not even necessary, was the implication that the centurion was making by saying, please, you don't have to turn up. The centurion was not actually burdened by growing up in Israel and internalizing Israel's obsession with itself and its rules. He would be forgiven for internalizing Rome's obsession with itself as the occupier, and they were in a position of authority and completely within rights to subjugate and ignore the Jewish customs and rules and expectations in that community. But despite that, he recognized Jesus as a healer and redeemer, not as the Messiah of the nation of Israel, but as an individual healer and redeemer of people. He could see the bigger picture where everyone else kind of got lost in the details, right? Also interesting is while I was researching this, I came across a comparison between the centurion and Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus. So when Lazarus died, Mary and Martha told Jesus, if you'd been here, he wouldn't have died, right? Very different expectations about how Jesus was expected to help the people who were in need. Mary and Martha had this idea that Jesus had to be there and be immediately there to do something to help Lazarus. What did Jesus do when he eventually did turn up? So when he did turn up, he spoke to Lazarus and commanded him to come out. He didn't do anything, he didn't make anything. He just talked, right? What did the centurion ask for? The centurion asked for, say the word and my servant will be healed. He understood that Jesus could command with a word rather than come be in the same room as a person to achieve something. So the thing I got this from was a sermon by a guy, W.C. Sproul. Has anyone heard that name before? Yeah. He went further and pointed out that all of creation was a result of Jesus speaking and commanding something to happen. Like everything as we were talking about in the lesson this morning, everything, the universe exists because Jesus commanded it. Why do we make it more complicated than that? Why do we think that we need something more from Jesus than just a word or a command? Why do we want him to be in the room or next to us to have an effect on our lives, right? Do we believe that a command from Jesus is enough, or do we keep putting our own conditions on how we want Jesus to help us? Anyway, back to the story. So, what if I was the crowd? So, if you take this story as a metaphor, I identify most strongly with the crowd, and I think the crowd here is the people in Capernaum. So it's a primarily Jewish Israel community at the top of Israel, on the coast of Galilee. The interesting thing for me here is the proximity of this story to the Sermon on the Mount. So that not only did the Sermon of the Mount just happen in the chapter before, it happened immediately in time before this event happened, and it happened hundreds of meters away from this. So it almost literally was Jesus finished the Sermon on the Mount, And then they walked down the mount to Capernaum, and this happened. So if we look at a summary of what the Sermon on the Mount was, right? I found this which expressed it pretty well. At the heart of the Sermon on the Mount is a message of love, compassion, and selflessness. Jesus encourages his listeners to love their enemies, to forgive others, and to care for the poor and marginalised. He also emphasises the importance of humility, telling his followers not to worry about material possessions or outward appearances, but to focus on living a life of righteousness and integrity. So, my feeling is this was an opportunity for what the sermon was about to be reflected as action in real life immediately after. The same crowd who just heard these words about how we're supposed to behave and interact and what our roles are in dealing with each other, the first situation after being told these things is this one. So Capernaum is part of Israel, and this was in front of the crowd in Capernaum. This is Jesus talking to the church, right? This is a visible set of actions to the established church. If I was in that crowd, would I see the lesson, right? Would I accept that what is being demonstrated in front of me has anything to do with the words that were just said beforehand? Would I, yeah. Another interesting thing which no one really talks about is what if I was the servant in this story, right? Does anyone identify with the servant? Thought about it before? So this was a man who ended up being healed by Jesus without him asking for it, or even coming close to Jesus, right? Have we ever benefited from someone else's intercession without realising it? We cannot be sure, we cannot say with any confidence that we have never had someone else help us or ask for help for us without our knowing. And if you take a step back, you could look at this whole story as an example of what was talked about in the lesson, where Jesus acts as an intercessor or an intermediary between God and us. And in this story, the centurion and Jesus are playing the same role. Do we understand that at the very least, the help that was given to us without our asking is Jesus died for our salvation? Do you have a water bottle I can have? So, what can we learn from all these things? So, what did the centurion actually ask for? He didn't actually ask for something for himself. He asked for intercession for someone under his command or his responsibility. What does that tell us? And that tells us we can intercede on behalf of people. And that feels a bit weird for me now, standing here in 2025. Like, do we need permission from someone to ask them if they want help, or do we just do it? I think I personally am kind of terrified of doing the wrong thing, so I overthink it, and I don't even bother in a lot of cases. But I feel like at some point we should have confidence that we do know what is right for people, and do know that we can ask God in particular for help for that person. And I don't think there's anyone better than God to ask, right? Who else is going to know what's going on with that person, every situation, every problem that they're dealing with, and know what the right answer and solution for them is? I don't see any harm at all in asking Jesus to intercede on anyone else's behalf. And that feeling I have where I feel like I should ask for permission first, I understand that in other situations, but I don't see the risk in asking Jesus or God to help someone else. This story is recorded, like I said, this story is recorded twice in the Bible. Depending on which one you read, then Jesus may or may not have even met the centurion, right? But in both of them, he didn't need to go to the house and meet the sick servant, but despite this, the servant was healed. All of these people were connected and part of the same society and community, so there was basically one degree of separation. So everyone knew everyone else, except in very limited situations. It's not like a friend of a cousin of a sister-in-law kind of thing. It was, the centurion was kind of at the centre of this, and everyone else was connected to him. So this was a very small community, right? Are we connected to any centurions? So if we are the established church, like the city of Capernaum, are there any people out in the community who are attracted or interested in the church? And what is our relationship to them? Do they just not exist? Anyway, coming back to, I have not found such great faith even in Israel. What do we think is impossible or complicated that the centurion didn't know? Like, why was his faith so much better, or his relationship with grace and salvation so impressive to Jesus compared to the rest of the nation of Israel? Have we overcomplicated our understanding of grace and faith? Do our motions and habit of church and worship actually get in the way sometimes? How do we remedy this situation? So let me saddle up my hobby horse again and get on. If we look at the example of the centurion and what he was doing in this story and why he was so admirable, in my opinion, is he was doing what he could to help the people around him. He helped build the synagogue for the people in Capernaum. Did he attend it? Doesn't say. He asked for intercession for the slave. Were these things transactional? Like, what did he expect in return for the help he gave to the rest of the community? Or did he just help for the sake of helping because he wanted to see the community improve? And when someone said, because of these things you are worthy of Jesus' attention, he said no. So my strong impression is that he was giving what he could, like what we were talking about in the lesson this morning, with the understanding that what had been given to him and what was available to him already was more than what he was trying to pay back. That's my impression of it. Was that his understanding of his own salvation? What was his understanding of his own salvation? If he could recognize that Jesus was the authority and power of God, what was his expectations moving forward in life? Like, how did that relationship affect what he was going to do moving forward? Can you think of something specific that we or us need to work on? Do we have anything in common with the centurion? Like I said, I identify much more strongly with the crowd in this story than I do with the centurion. But the centurion is the one who's held up as the desirable and amazing person of faith in this story. How can I move myself from being part of the crowd to being the centurion, right? And I think it comes back to that story I was talking about before. Being indoctrinated or growing up in a community can kind of get influenced by the wrong things. Like, if we're told that our church is the one where we're supposed to meet God, how do we know which bit of the culture and practice are the important things for getting us there? Do we end up focusing on the wrong actions and motions and order of service and time of worship and all this kind of stuff? Is that even important in the long run? Like I said, I didn't even get an indication that the centurion went to church, but he's still the man of faith that everyone else is supposed to aspire to. The centurion knew that a word from Jesus could heal the servant. Do we know that? Do we believe it? Do we act on it? So my son fell off a bike yesterday and broke his arm. As a father, that's a bit upsetting. It's kind of hilarious as well, but mostly upsetting. Do I believe that God could heal his arm? And I would say 100% I am certain. Am I confident that if I asked for it, it would happen? That's a much harder question, right? I have no doubt he could, but would he in this situation? Do I have the faith to accept either answer to that question? If I ask for it and he says yes, what does that mean for me moving forward? If I ask for it and he says no, does that challenge my faith? If I don't ask for it and nothing happens, am I the bad person for not venturing anything in this situation? Yes. So yeah, that's my take on a minor character in the Bible and how something that we can learn from them. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Or where? No? So, I think we'll finish with hymn number 528, is that correct?